Go.
So, hello again. This is Eric Derby with Recruiter Secrets. Today we're talking about working with recruiters, and there's a couple different takes on this, and I'll go through those shortly. First of all, this is about discussion and answering questions. I have a format, but I don't necessarily have to keep to that format. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Ruth will be watching over those. I won't, I'll just be talking, and I talk kind of fast. So if you do have questions, put something in the chat and then she will get that to me. Feel free to ask questions. Let me know if there's things you don't want me to cover or if there's things you do. So definitions for today. The basic categories of things people I'm going to talk about is a corporate recruiter. Corporate recruiter is somebody who works inside of a corporation to fill jobs inside of that corporation. And typically, if you have the job title corporate recruiter, that is all you do. Now, where are you going to find these people? Typically only in much larger companies. Smaller companies cannot afford to have somebody doing recruiting full-time. They don't want to pay somebody doing it full-time when they don't have jobs full-time. They have jobs a few times a year, or sometimes they'll have a burst of hires. So they typically can't, afford to have a full-time recruiter. So if there is somebody that is full-time, odds are pretty good they're in a larger company. In a small or medium-sized company, you're much more likely to find an HR person that also happens to do recruiting on the side, on top of all the other jobs that they've got to do. There's also a staffing agency recruiter. I'll talk a lot more about agencies and how those work, but basically the point of those is they're staffing agencies whose job it is either to find and fill contract or direct positions at companies in whatever area, physical location they work, and sometimes in a specific domain. Headhunter is somewhat different, and they've really kind of changed some over the past maybe 20 years or so. That headhunters used to be a lot more common. They're a lot less common now, and they tend to have much more specialization than they used to have. Again, I'll go into more details on that later. First of all, a little more about HR. I want to talk to you a little bit about a day in the life of an HR person. Typically, your average HR person is covering things about benefits. They're doing, relations with employees. They might be working on long-term plans. They've got all kinds of different projects going on. Typically, their day is full. And then what happens is somebody comes along and says, oh, I know you're busy, but we have 5 positions we want you to fill next month. Can you take this home and start working on this tonight? And that's actually pretty common. Some of the best corporate recruiters I know work about 50 or 60 hours a week. And a lot of the emails I get from them are in the evenings, because they have work to do during the day related to their HR job. So that's just something I want you to think about, that for most HR people that are also doing recruiting, this is kind of an add-on. They've already got a full-time job, and now they're trying to do recruiting on top of that. Kind of going back a little bit to what is the job of a recruiter? That's one thing that I like to just make clear to people, because I've had a lot of arguments and there's a couple interesting stories in my book about this, but what is the job of the recruiter? The job of the recruiter is to find a good person to do a job. It's not to read your resume. It's not to interview every person. It is to find the right person for that job. And whatever methods that takes, if they have 100 resumes and they have to go through them all quickly, well, that's kind of the nature of the job. And their job is to find that person, not necessarily to give feedback to everybody that they can't hire. So, and part of that relates to the priority of recruiting in companies. Over the years, the size of HR as a percentage of the company has slowly shrunk. So there's less people, and of course, there's more and more legislation, more rules they have to follow, more forms that they have to fill out for the government. So they have to do more with less people. And what happens is recruiting tends to get a very low priority. I'm actually working on site with a client right now that I'm actually really, really happy that the CTO reschedules other meetings so that he can do interviews. I have never, ever seen anybody do that before. That it's absolutely wonderful that this company has recruiting as a high priority. And it's only a company of 25 people, and then they've hired me to do more recruiting for them. So that's abnormal, just so you know. Most companies do not have a high enough, in my opinion, priority for recruiting. Other things tend to come first. Recruiting tends to be after hours and extra stuff. If you're talking with an HR person or want to talk with an HR person, how do you get their attention? One of the things I was reading a while back was saying, you need to be outrageous. You need to do something, unusual to get their attention. And my advice is the reverse, is be simple, be direct. I applied for this job. Can you give me a status? Thank you for your time. And just keep it at that. That is much, much more likely to get you a reply than something outrageous. It might give the person a laugh, it might be funny, but it's not necessarily going to get you a better response and get their attention and get what you're looking for. One of the questions I'm commonly asked is, should I go around HR? And in general, I'd say probably. It's pretty common to do that. HR isn't always the most efficient. It isn't always the best way to do it. And one of the things that was part of my training when I studied for my SPHR was to explain about internal referrals. That internal referrals are something that should be a priority because statistically, those people that are internal referrals, first of all, nobody's going to refer somebody to you. No person that's already employed is going to send you a resume of somebody that they don't think can do the job. And if you do end up hiring them, they tend to be more productive and they tend to stay longer than the average employee. So what that means for the most part is internal referrals generally go to the top of the stack, at least to somebody that understands these statistics. So that's just something to be aware of. So should you go around HR? Sometimes it can be very, very useful to do so because you're getting an internal referral, and that is a very, very powerful way to get an interview and potentially get a job. Agencies. I find that there's a lot of misunderstanding about exactly how agencies are set up and how they work. And this causes, I guess you could say, a lot of angst and confusion because things don't work the way candidates want sometimes. So first of all, you have an account manager. In an agency, the account manager is the person that is responsible for contacting companies to find out what jobs they have open and basically put a contract in place. So account manager will call company Z if they have an opening, say, okay, here's our contract. We'd like to work that for you, get that contract signed. Once that contract is signed, then the job descriptions get passed off to the recruiter. The recruiter can then call all the candidates to try and find somebody that's a fit. If you're a fit, the recruiter will interview you. They will do some type of write-up depending on how the agency works. They will pass that off to the account manager, who will then pass that off to their client because the client wants a single point of contact, and that is the account manager. So typically, your agency recruiter is not going to have direct contact with the client. That's just something to be aware of. Now, there's an exception to this. In some agencies, there's something called a blended desk, which is somebody that does both account management and recruiting. And back in my agency days, I was one of those strange examples. Most agencies don't have a whole lot of them. It's just rather unusual to have somebody that is good at both sides. So typically you're going to either be an account manager or a recruiter. The thing to understand about that, again, is that the recruiter does not have direct contact with the hiring manager. They have to go through the account manager. Now, again, there are exceptions to that. Sometimes the account manager will introduce the recruiters to the person. Sometimes the recruiter can talk to the hiring manager directly. But I would say that tends to be more uncommon. As I said before, headhunters are a little bit different nowadays than what they used to be. Typically, a headhunter is a blended desk. Typically, a headhunter is somebody that works alone. They have their own company. Sometimes there are some companies that have larger groups of headhunters. Nowadays, they tend to specialize a lot more. So a while back, I was doing an on-site contract at a local food production company, and I was absolutely shocked at the number of recruiters that were calling me that were specialized in food. That's all they did was people that dealt with food, is production managers or operations managers or people that manage the production lines. So I was very surprised at that, and that tends to be more common nowadays. And again, so that's something you're just going to find a lot more, is a lot more specialization. So if you are specialized, you might want to look for somebody, a headhunter that has your specific area or your specific domain. Can you ask any of these people for coaching, be they agencies or headhunters? You can ask. Do not have high expectations that they're going to be able to help. I'm a strange example. I work for myself. I am not really a corporate recruiter. I'm not exactly an agency recruiter. I'm kind of this strange hybrid. I like to coach people sometimes, which again is where my book came from, right? Because people were asking me questions, and rather than repeat these things again and again and again, I figured, oh, I'll just write a book. And so I did. So if you have further questions, everything I'm saying here is in the book, and in some cases has more detail. How to work with an agency. One, I suggest you find that agency via a referral. Talk with your friends, talk with your enemies, talk with anybody you need to. Say, what agency do you know that does a good job, that works in my area of specialty? That's the best way to find somebody, is via referral. If you just open the phone book, or for that matter, Google, because nobody uses the phone book anymore. If you just Google for agencies, you're going to find plenty of agencies out there, but you're not necessarily going to know who's good. You're not necessarily going to know who works in your area. If you want to work with them, you really need to know what it is you're looking for. Beyond just, I'm looking for a job as an electrical engineer. I'm looking for a job as an electrical engineer in a small to medium-sized company where I can have a variety of tasks, where I can do hands-on engineering, and where I can do 20% team lead. Have an idea of what you want to be able to present to them, because if you can show them exactly what you want, there's a much better chance that they're going to be able to help you, or be able to say, no, sorry, I can't help you, or I don't have jobs of that sort right now. So knowing what you want and be able to present that concisely is going to forward your cause with the agency. I do not recommend using only an agency for your job search, unless, well, there are some exceptions to that. Like every once in a while, I'll get a call from somebody and it says, well, you know, I'm mostly happy where I am, and could you take a look and see if you can find this type of job for me, so I can keep them on my active list. And that's what's known in the recruiting industry as a passive candidate, somebody that's not really actively looking for a job. So if you are employed and mostly happy but are looking for something a little different, then in that case, it would be okay to use just an agency. But for the most part, don't rely on an agency. There's many, many, many other ways. And again, I'm sure Ruth can coach you on those. You can read my book about other methods for job search. If you're going to work with the agency, make sure you're working with an agency that is going to tell you everywhere they send your resume. And for that matter, I kind of prefer somebody that's going to talk to you and talk to you about the company and the job before they send your resume anywhere. As part of that, you should be tracking where your resume goes with the agency and all the applications you've got yourself, whether it's a spreadsheet, piece of paper, it doesn't really matter. Track where your resume goes. So if the agency starts talking to you about a job, you can say, well, you know, I just applied to this job at Xerox. You know, is this job sound similar? Is it that job? sometimes agency will ask you where you've applied recently, and sometimes you might have a long list. But it's good to have that to track it, because you really don't want to, again, the point is to avoid duplication. Understand that with an agency, their time is their money, to be a little more specific here. If you are not the right kind of candidate for them, they may not have time to talk with you. They have jobs to fill. And I'm going to tell you a funny story too about when so I've worked for other agencies. And in one case, I was working for an agency, and they have numbers, they have metrics. You have to make a certain number of calls a day. And what that typically means is, if I'm going to talk with a candidate, I have 10 to 15 minutes, and that's about it. And then I have to get on to the next call. Now, I don't work that way. I like to build relationship. I like to get to know my candidates better. And sometimes I like to sell them on the client, give them more information. So I was working for this agency. I was on the phone for 15 minutes. And my manager, off in his glass bubble, was kind of looking at me funny. And then after 20 minutes, he was giving me more funny looks. And after 25 minutes, he was standing behind me, tapping his foot, wondering what the heck I was still doing on the phone. I didn't really stay there a whole lot longer. It wasn't really my style. But the point is that this is the way agencies work. You don't have a lot of time. So these recruiters might like to build a relationship with you. They might like to get to know you better, but they have metrics, they have rules, they have ways that they have to do things that the agency has described to them. This is how you have to do your job. If they try to break that, then they will have their manager standing behind them, tapping their foot, wondering why they're doing that. And for the most part now, most agencies also have the manager in his or her fishbowl will actually have a dashboard showing all their people how many calls they've made, how long the average call is, how close they are to meeting their metrics for that day. So my point there is just to understand that a lot of people complain that they don't have enough time with recruiters, or recruiters don't return their calls. These recruiters have rules and metrics that they are under, right? So,
and Eric, I want to say that is probably one of the top questions that people doing my kind of work get, is why do recruiters ghost me? And you see complaints, and you all have seen them, I'm sure, on LinkedIn. People are complaining every single day. This person didn't call me back. And I always have to explain to people that you just have to understand that they're not working for you. I mean, if you can kind of grasp that, and if you don't mind my asking you this question, what might some other reasons be that a person might not get a lot of time with the recruiter?
Okay.
Clue us in on.
I was already coming up with answers.
All right.
So a couple things. So if the recruiter doesn't return your call, it might be one, because they don't have any jobs for you, and it does not do them any good to call you back. So as much as they might want to call you, if they don't, they've got to focus on the jobs that are on their desk. Two, if they've already talked to you and they've already sent your resume, they may not have feedback from the client, and they do not have direct contact. So they have to bug their account manager. The account manager has to bug the client. So you've got a couple layers there to go through before they can actually get any detail. And if the client doesn't want your resume, you may not know that right away, because the client has to tell that to the account manager, who has to tell that to the recruiter, who has to get it to you, right? And sometimes the clients are so busy, they don't bother rejecting people. They just say, okay, you sent us 10 people. I want to interview Jack and Jane. And that's it. And they'd say, well, what about everybody else? Well, we'll deal with that later. And then later never comes. So as a related example to this, I had a client ghost me. So this client that I've been working with for 14 years has not responded to one of my emails in 3 weeks. And I got 2 candidates in front of them. So I know they have jobs, and I know they're interviewing, but they just have not responded to me. So that happens as well. Sometimes the clients don't get back to me, and there's just nothing I can do about it other than, so I don't always want to call a candidate and say, yeah, I don't have anything to tell you this week. They haven't got back to me yet. I don't want to make my client look bad, but I also want to work on the things that are going to be productive for me, like bugging my client again. to try and get some of that feedback.
But it's okay to ask the recruiter, right? It is okay to send an email, quick email. Hi, I haven't talked to you in a week. I just want to check in. What's happening? Do you have anything to
in general, I like a weekly email check-in. That's what I prefer. And I think what you need to do is when you talk with the recruiter, when you try to build, when you in that during 15-minute conversation you have, trying to build a relationship, is find out how often should I check in? Should I check in once a week? When I interview a candidate, I say, okay, it's Thursday. I'm sending your resume off today. I should hear back from them by Tuesday. If you do not hear from me by next Thursday, feel free to call me or send me an email. I'm a recruiter. I work very bizarre hours. If you send me an email, you're much more likely to get a response because I can do that in the evening after dinner. So emails are a good way to check in with me, but other agencies may not be the same. Again, I'm an introvert. I like email. I do a lot of email. I've got 9,000 emails in my inbox, literally. And that's only one inbox. I have about 10 different email addresses. So emails are a good way to check in. For me, again, weekly is good. If I don't respond to you, it's not that I'm ghosting you, it's that I have no updates. I don't have anything new to tell you. If it has been a while and you check in, I will say, sorry, I haven't heard back from the client yet. I know they're interviewing. I know you're on the list, and I'll get back to you as soon as I know more. I don't like it when my clients don't get back to me. I understand that, candidates are impatient, that you want a job, you want the interview. I want it too. That's how I get paid, right? Not only that, but I like finding people jobs. That's why I do this. So I like to get people feedback, but I can't always do it. So
folks, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to write them in the chat. Maybe you can't think of any right now, but.
Or we can come back to that at the end.
Yeah, sure. We will in a few minutes, yeah.
So last of all, about an agency is to, in my opinion, expect respect. Go in and expect that they're going to respect you as a person. If they don't, then leave. There's a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of other places you can go. You don't have to be treated like a number, right? And I can't say I've been perfect. There's definitely people that I haven't gotten back to when I should have. It's impossible in this industry to be perfect. I've made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But for the most part, look for a company, look for an agency that is going to listen to you, that is going to listen to what you want and listen to your thoughts. So expect somebody that's going to respect your wishes, or move on. Pros of working with an agency: it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. The jobs that they have may not be found elsewhere, and that is definitely true with me. A number of the clients I have exclusives with. I am the only agency working with them. Yes, their jobs are out on their website, but no, they're not always caught by the web crawlers. So you may not find them on Indeed or any of the other job aggregators. And there it is, it's down there. Wealth of information. And I have a ton of information on my client. I can give you a long history of the ups and downs. In the case of this one client that ghosted me, like I can tell you that in 2008, they did layoffs. I can tell you how many people I've placed there. I can tell you that, the retention rates. I can tell you that the 2 people that have left were hired away by Apple, right? So a lot of information about the company that I can give you. Sometimes if I present you to a client, I can get more feedback than you might otherwise get from HR. HR tends to give you very generic, like, oh, we found somebody better, like, or you weren't a fit. Like, well, that's not helpful. It doesn't help you at all. So sometimes, because we have direct contact with managers, we can get more feedback about the candidates. But that will also depend on the managers. Some are
and
good.
HR doesn't know the roles either. They don't work at the level that the hiring manager does. So they don't really know what the role is. Right. They don't.
And there's really, so kind of, speaking to that specifically, there is no benefit for HR to give you feedback, right? There is benefit in my opinion, okay? Because it makes the company look better, right? If they're going to give you feedback, I mean, when I was working on site at Pictometry, every candidate that came in, I wrote them a customized letter. I took it to the engineering manager. He signed them all. Each letter said something about why they didn't get the job, customized. And what that did for the company is that every candidate that interviewed there still wanted to work there. You know, it was great. So there's good reason to give good feedback. But the problem is that for HR, that's especially difficult because HR has to, you know, go pulling teeth, you know, take their pliers and pull that information out of the hiring manager, which is very, very difficult because the hiring manager is busy. And as we've already said, HR is busy. They've got a ton of things on their plate on top of recruiting. So it's really, it doesn't create a lot of payback for them, with the exception of, again, building good PR for the company. It's hard for HR to give you good feedback. So the point being that agencies can sometimes give you more feedback, not always, again, depends on the manager. Wealth of information about the client. In my case, I can give you a ton of information. Kind of going back to the agencies and how they work, sometimes the account manager will say, well, okay, here's the job, and they'll throw the job description at the recruiter. And the recruiter won't know anything about the company, nothing about the culture, nothing about the company history. So sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the account manager in one of the agencies I worked with, the account managers were good at gathering that information and passing that out to the recruiters. So the recruiters knew more and they had more information to give to the potential candidates. So that's just something to be aware of, to ask for detail. They may have it, they may not. Again, depends on who, the agency, how they work, what their methods are. Agencies will generally know their market. If they, in my case, I know software engineering salaries. I know most other engineering related salaries. I know IT salaries. I know who's hiring. I know who's not. I know trends that are going on. I can tell you that everything is messed up now because of COVID and because of everybody working remote, that I don't even know what the salaries are anymore. but that's, everybody's having that problem, that salaries are going all over. But that's the point, is that they can often give you a lot more information that you may not have otherwise about the realities of your own local market. And last of all, they can help you if we are getting to the point where there's a job offer, they can help you with negotiation. It is in their best interest to get you a job that you are happy with, because every agency has a guarantee that you're going to stay there. If you start a job and realize the day after you start the job that you're making 20K less than market and 20K less than the company could pay, that's not going to help out your longevity at the company, right? So it is in the recruiter's best interest to get you a fair salary that is market appropriate, that is company appropriate, and to fit you into a job in a company that is good for you, and to help negotiate to do that. And most recruiters, well, again, sometimes you're going to get, you call an agency and you get a recruiter that, just got their business degree and they're trying to be a recruiter now, and they don't really have a lot of experience with that yet. So you may not always find that, but typically if you've got somebody that's been doing it for a bunch of years, they are going to help you with negotiation and be able to help. And sometimes they will negotiate on your behalf. Sometimes they can say, if you want to do it, you can. I'm very open to how that happens. Some of my candidates have been very great at negotiating, and I just give them a few hints here and there on how to go about doing that. So again, I'm open to it. There's a lot of ways to negotiate. But again, that's one of the things that an agency can bring to the table for you. Cons of working for an agency. I've already mentioned the first one. If you are not a fit for the agency, they may not ever call you back, ever. Or they may never send you an email, but they might put you on their mailing list.
Well, this is one thing that I actually tell. Yeah, I've actually made this point to people. None of you, I know pretty much all of you that are on this with us today, and you're not these people, but there are people who just apply everywhere and try to bug every recruiter, and they know they're not really qualified for that job. I just think that's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to use the word rude, but it's like, really, people, come on.
Yep. Oh, I get plenty, and I get that. I get plenty of applications I mean, I do at least give some feedback that if somebody, sends me a resume and they're not a fit, I will typically send an email and say, I don't have anything that can help you. And I said, you can check in 3 months that I've got a client who might have a job, but if I can't help somebody, I will try to let them know that. But most agencies will not do that. And related to that, they can be hard to reach, right? Because they have work to do. And even if you are a good candidate for them, they might have a different focus. Their boss might have come and said, you really need to work on company Z today and this week, because this is our priority client. You have to do all your work on this, ignore your other candidates for a week, right? So you can get directives like that if you're in an agency. But for the most part, these people are pretty busy, right? They're trying to earn a living as well. Oh, one of the things I forgot to cover in the agency thing is agencies and how they make money. Here's an interesting piece for you. So, and I'm going to give you typical numbers. They will change based on the agency, but let's say that you work with an agency and you get a job at company Z. Often the recruiter, of the fee that comes into the company, the recruiter will get 20%. The account manager will get 20%, and the rest will go to the house to pay for all the job ads they do, to pay for the offices, which aren't being used right now, to pay for the admins, to pay for the manager that's tapping his foot behind your chair. The recruiter does not get a huge percentage of the money. Recruiters are, unless they are really good, they don't get rich. Right? They are struggling to make money. And in many cases, they end up making about as much money as a lot of the people they place. At least that's typical. Now, some agencies have better compensation plans that as you make more placements, you actually get a higher percentage, which means you actually make, it just builds on itself. And you can make a tremendous amount of money in a good agency that has a fair plan. But for the most part, most of the recruiters you talk to are not going to make huge amounts of money. So agencies place a fairly small percentage of people. This is something that most agencies do not talk about and don't like me to talk about. Your typical agency will place less than 20% of the people they talk to. A lot of agencies will place less than 10, some even less than 5%. There was a panel I was on a bunch of years ago where I said something like this out loud, and one of the recruiters on the panel was very like, that's not true. We place 50% of the people we talk to. And like, well, maybe. If they're doing a lot of like contract placement and into factories and things of that sort, maybe they're placing a high percentage of people. But that goes back to the reason like you don't want to rely on a recruiter for your job, because they only place a small percentage of the people that they actually work with. So, and that, I don't know if any agencies will actually ever ask, if you were to ask an agency that question, I don't know if they would ever answer. I am actually less than 10% of the people that I talk to that I actually place. So it's a fairly small number. I mean, I do my best to help everybody, but I can't find jobs for nearly all the candidates that I work with. In some cases, and as like I said, the example I gave before, if you've got a new recruiter, that recruiter may not understand anything about what you do. The best case example is if you find an agency that has somebody that has actually worked in your field before. There was the one agency that I really, really didn't like, that I won't even tell you the name of because it was so unethical and bad to work for. One of the things they did well was that the recruiters had to have experience in their industry. Wow. And so they could talk to people well. So that was a good thing that they did. And there are other agencies that do that. Headhunters often have that. They often have some expertise, in the food industry. They were a manager first and they knew that well and they had a lot of contacts. So then they started doing recruiting. So.
Does anyone have any questions? We're at 20 to the hour and I just wanted to give people a chance. Anyone?
I actually have quite a few, but I was waiting to the end because
okay, we're almost done. Give me like another
Sure,
3 or
sure.
4
Sorry,
minutes.
Eric. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of times I'll stop in the middle and say, any questions
Yeah.
on what we covered so far? So, so again, the recruiter may not have expertise. Look for somebody with expertise that understands, even if they haven't done it before. Make sure, if you're looking for a position as a Java developer, they don't send you out, as a C# developer. So try and make sure they understand at least the basics of what you're doing. They don't always have as good a relationship with the client as they have sold you on. And again, some of this might be the account manager thing, and that there's another layer in there. Sometimes they just don't have the depth and they don't have all the information. Agencies typically cannot help you with coaching and typically can't help you with a career change. If your resume isn't focused on what they do, they often cannot help you. And you're better off going to a job coach. General thoughts. When communicating with recruiters, internal, external, headhunters, whatever, keep your communications concise. So one of the things I was taught years ago when sending emails to my manager is to keep them concise. The shorter they are, the more likely they are to get responses. So do the same thing with anybody you talk to related to your job search. Keep them short, add a little value here, ask 1 or 2 questions. If it gets too long, then it's going to get in the I'll do it later pile, which means it's never going to get done. Always, with everybody you work with, be they allies, be they people who are helping you out, give appreciation, show respect, whether it's internal recruiter, an agency, any of your allies. There's a ton of people that are going to help you out in your job search. Be appreciative of their time, and that way you're likely to get more next time. So have a good resume. Have one that's simple and engaging. I have actually another presentation that I give on resumes that is like over an hour long, in my opinions on that. Simple is better. Think of it as an advertising sheet, not a reflection of your soul, right? It is a way to get you an interview. That's all. So the better your resume is, the easier it is on the recruiters to figure out what it is you do and to figure out whether or not they have any jobs that are going to fit you. When you talk with anybody, and we already talked about this, ask about how the people like to be contacted, how often do they like to be contacted. Get that information up front so that you can follow up properly. Again, if you send me an email every week, that's not going to bug me. Even if I don't have time to respond to it, it adds you to the top of my mental queue if you check in with me every week, even if I don't have time to respond. So for me, that's good, but find out what is best for other people in terms of how they want. Some people like texting now, some people like emails. Not many people like calls anymore. So find out what they want and how often that should be. Okay, now I'm done. Go ahead, shoot.
Michael, you said you had go on.
Yeah, I had a few. I'm just trying to decide what's most important and maybe most broadly useful. I'll put most of them in the category of hiring managers and how to work with them. Couple things. One is, how do you suggest we engage hiring managers if we know who they are ahead of applying to the job? I often have networked enough that I know who it is. How would you handle a situation like that? Another one would be on the feedback side of things. After the resume is over, if the HR person doesn't have time, I've had luck once or twice, but just to call them up and ask them for advice, not why I didn't get the job, but just advice on what I can do to interview differently. So that's my general question: is how do you suggest people work with hiring managers?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to give a couple of different directions. One, if you know personally the hiring manager, that's a very different scenario than if you know who the manager is, right? So if you know the hiring manager, whether you've worked with them, met them in networking events, absolutely call them direct. But again, find out when I say call them, contact them directly, right? find out how they prefer to be contacted, and then contact them directly if you have a relationship. If you don't have a relationship, my suggestion would be to find somebody else you know that can foster that relationship. So if you have if you can use LinkedIn, if you know the hiring manager and then you know Bob who works at the company, have Bob introduce you, right? So find a way in, get that introduction. If you don't have anybody at the company, I'm trying to remember what company I was looking up. There was a company I'm looking up yesterday that I was absolutely surprised that with 3,500 LinkedIn connections, I did not have a single first level connection in that company. So that one would be really hard for me to get my foot in the door. Again, as a recruiter, I mean, that's kind of what I do sometimes too, right? I want to get the hiring manager. I want to talk to them too. But I go through, that's my method as a recruiter. If I want to get my foot in the door at a company, I want to talk to the hiring manager. And how am I going to do that? So the first thing I do is I look for other people I know in the company. If you don't have that, then look for other people in your networking group that might know somebody in the company or that know anything about that.
It could even be a client of that company, somebody that's done business with that company and knows the people there.
Yep. Yeah, if you don't have any of those, and if you know the name of the person, you can use a recruiting trick. If you have ever emailed anybody to that company, you can look up the format of the email address, right? And whether it's like first letter of their first name plus their last name at companyz.com, and try to send them an email. Typically, for most of the areas I work, I suggest email over calls or texting because nobody ever answers their phone anymore. And it's hard to get. I mean, you might know somebody's office phone, but to be able to get their cell phone to be able to send them a text, that's fairly uncommon also. So email, you can often figure out the email format, send them an email, make a quick introduction, keep it, again, fairly short, keep it concise. I've heard you're looking for an electrical engineer. I'd like to talk to you about that position. That would be my approach. So when I'm looking to get my foot in the door of the company, those are the methods that I'm going to use.
It is a case basis too. When I work with clients, I always talk to them like, well, what have you been doing? What's been happening? And then you have to make a decision based on what's been going on. And sometimes it's more extreme. Sometimes it is picking up the phone. It just depends on what the situation is,
And sometimes it actually works to go through HR, so if you are failing in other ways to get in the door, try HR. Sometimes that works. You call the HR person and say, look, I'm trying to get, in touch with the hiring manager for this job. Can you give me the name of the person or their email address? Sometimes they will, not often, but again, that's just another method. So there's no one method to get your name or get your information in front of that manager. I think a lot of it comes down to persistence. And then the second question was getting feedback. I like your perspective, the way that you put it in terms of, do you have any advice for me in terms of what can I do going forward to be better in an interview? Rather than ask like, what's wrong with me? What am I lacking? What can I do better? They're more likely to answer that, right? Because they're more likely to answer a positive, because people don't like to give negative feedback. But they're happy to say where you can improve, which is the same thing, right? But it's just posing it a different way. So you're much more likely to get a response if you pose things in the, can you help me? What can I do better? Do you have any suggestions for me? That format works. Now, one of the things I will also, I know we're not talking about interviewing today, but you can do that in an interview too. And I've actually seen a lot more success in that recently, that at the end of the interview, and actually I've seen a lot more people ask me that, that I'll be on, because my phone interviews with candidates are like an hour long. And at the end of the interview, the candidate asks, so do you have any suggestions for me? Anything I could have done better? Do you think I'm a good fit for this position? How do I compare to other candidates? There's a lot of questions that people can ask me, and I will answer all of them because I'm different and I'm blunt.
It's hard to ask that in an interview sometimes, but I always suggest it too. I say, so is there anything about my background that I haven't addressed that you would like to know more about? which is kind of saying to them, is there something troubling you you're not bringing up? You know, let's just quash it right now, you know?
Right. So there's a lot of questions you can ask in the interview to get feedback. And sometimes that's the only feedback you're ever going to get, right? So I typically encourage that. But again, some of it will be based on how the interview went, how well, you know, if you feel like you've done a good job building rapport with the manager, if you feel like you have a good amount of openness, then you're going to be more likely to get answers to those questions. Just again, don't ask for the negatives. Ask for the job, right? You know, be forward that. Say, you know, I'd like this job. You know, give good feedback yourself. Is that enough answers? Anything more?
I heard someone start to talk. Was I wrong?
Thanks, Eric. That was helpful in that space. Thank you.
Welcome. And we can open the questions to anything, not just about talking with recruiters.
I do have a question, Eric, that I've been wondering about. Okay. Like, I just want to see what you say about this. If you can address this. Many people apply for jobs because the first thing they do instinctively is just to look on Indeed and LinkedIn and different websites, right? And a Glassdoor to find ads. But they're often very disappointed when they find out that that job's no longer available, or they might get inside for an interview and then find out there was an internal candidate already selected for that position. What is it about job ads that's so difficult for people to figure out? You know, if they just go through something that's already there. Is there anything you can enlighten us about how these things are constructed or?
Well, first of all, you know, anytime you use something like Indeed that is an aggregator, you're potentially always going to have that problem because it's pulling stuff off the web, and then sometimes it's pulling off jobs that somebody else pulled off. So the aggregators feed on each other. So you can find a job on Indeed that hasn't been open for months. So my suggestion is, okay, I'll give you one of my tricks. This is a recruiter trick. If I see a job ad and I want to find out who the company is, I will do a copy. I will take the first couple paragraphs of the job description, and I will go into Google and I will paste the first couple paragraphs in there, and I will see where that comes up. And that can often find me the original company that posted that job. Now, if that job's no longer there, then obviously it's not going to come up, right? Because Google is much better about keeping their stuff up to date. But that's a good way to find out if the job is really there, because those aggregators, now, in theory, Indeed is working hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But the problem is, again, that the aggregators feed each other. You know, it just gets kind of messy. Now, some of the problem too is that you've got phantom jobs, and this is especially true in agencies that, and I'll use Xerox as an example, but because when I was working for the agency, we had Xerox jobs. And a lot of times we didn't have a particular software engineer job, but we knew one was going to open up next week, or there's almost always one open. So we just never take the job down, right? And sometimes there's a job and sometimes there's not. But the agencies often leave jobs like that up. I think they're trying to reduce costs and not do that so often. The other problem is that once a job is up there, you know, if it's a corporate job, once, you know, if the recruiter has gotten the job posted, their emphasis is more on posting the next jobs than taking off the ones that have been filled, right? And for that matter, even if there is an internal candidate, they are not going to take that job posting down until the person is sitting in the seat. Just because an offer has been accepted is not good enough. That they have to make sure there's somebody actually there, because people, you know, there's all kinds of things that can happen, right? That it doesn't matter, even if the job's been accepted, the person might not actually start the job. So if that posting has been collecting more resumes in the meantime, that will be more candidates for them if the job is not filled. But
True.
like it will be filled, because most people don't accept a job offer and then not go and sit in the seat. But sometimes it happens. So it's just some of it is safety net stuff, and at least in terms of the internal, the corporate HR positions that stay out there longer. In some cases, it's company policy that if we're going to interview somebody internally, we have to post the job. Like, especially there's government requirements for if you've got a company that does any work for the government, you have to post jobs. If you're going to consider somebody for visa sponsorship, you have to post the jobs. There's all these reasons so even if they've already got somebody in mind, sometimes they have to do it. And then then they'll never look at your resume because they've already got it filled.
Well, we have a question from Mary Ann asking, should you reveal that you're working with multiple recruiters or keep that close to the vest?
I like to know if you're working with other recruiters. And my reasoning is selfish. Because I know if you're working with 5 other recruiters, my odds of placing you just went way down, right? So that doesn't thrill me a whole lot. So on the one hand, it's probably better to not talk about it a lot. I would say, however, keep the number of agencies you work with to a fairly small, manageable number, right? Don't work with 6 agencies at once. Work with 2 or 3 or 1 or 4, but keep the number small. Agencies are kind of competitive too, so that might turn off some people. I expect anytime I talk with a candidate, unless I know they're a passive candidate, that there are other ways that they're doing their search, and I will expect that. Again, what do recruiters fill? What is it, like 30 or 25%? Do you know, Ruth, what the numbers are nowadays?
No, I don't.
In terms of agencies, fill a fairly small percentage. They are not the largest filler of jobs. So I think it's okay to work with other agencies, with multiple agencies. But I guess I would say that it's probably best not to share too much. I mean, if they ask, you can tell them, but don't talk too much about it. So, but again, that's up to you. I probably wouldn't in thinking about that. So if I was working through agencies, I probably would keep track of the jobs that they've sent me to and talk about those if necessary. But
I always coach job seekers that, information should always be on a need-to-know basis through your whole job search.
Right.
Don't ever think that you have to reveal every single thing about yourself to everybody. I mean, hate to say it, but that's life these days in the big city, right?
Yep.
So, we also had folks are wondering how to reach you. I don't know if you have a contact form on your website or not. Maybe you don't. But can you put in the chat the best way to reach you?
Okay. I can't get to the chat now while I don't think.
You should be able to at the bottom.
Let me do this.
Or if you just stop your presentation, stop sharing.
So in general, actually, yeah, I can take that down. Share. So in general, my website is softwarescout.com. My email address is out there. My phone numbers. Actually, I don't know if all my phone. I think I took my cell phone off of that. But
you want to just type it in the chat?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So.
Also, you can find Eric on LinkedIn. So. And you certainly can find me, and I know Eric. So. Let me just take a look at LinkedIn real quick, and I will just grab it from LinkedIn. Oh, that's easy. Very easy.
What, my website?
Yeah, also your LinkedIn profile, which I just put in here.
So
Software Scout.
Yeah, a long time ago when they allowed that, I grabbed it right away. I was an early adopter for LinkedIn. So that Skype phone number down there, it's a real phone number. You don't have to have Skype to call me on that number. But that will reach me wherever I am because it comes into my computer. So a lot of times that's better than my office number.
Well, we're a little bit after 1. I'm willing to stick around a little bit longer if Eric is, if anyone else has a question.
Yeah, I'm not in a big hurry today.
Anyone?
No, I can see the chat, see if there's more questions.
You gave us a lot of good information. I mean, really, a lot.
Appreciate your time, Eric. It's very good. Very good.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
And everything there, everything I said today is in my book.
Yes, which I just ordered your book. I finally ordered your book. So yeah. I wonder also, I'm just gonna ask you about LinkedIn really quickly.
Okay.
Tell us how you use it as a recruiter.
There is never a time when I don't have multiple tabs open on LinkedIn, right? Every day it is the most used tool I have. Well, with the possible exception, if you consider email a tool, I use email more. But outside of email, LinkedIn is the most used tool. I will have it open all the time. If I have somebody email me, I will, go look up. If I don't know who it is, I'll go look up their profile on LinkedIn. In the case of this one client that I'm working on site with, I've had a bunch of applications come in and some people didn't attach their resume. So I went and looked them up on LinkedIn. If I'm looking at LinkedIn and I see, so here's one of my opinions about LinkedIn that is a little different from some people. If you are looking for a job, I do recommend, it is my opinion, that you should put that in your subject on LinkedIn. Looking for my next great, electrical engineering opportunity.
What you mean in the headline?
Yes, in the headline.
Yeah, because I always coach against that. The reason being, you're wasting real estate that you could be using explaining what you bring to the employer.
Well, if I see that, if I'm going through LinkedIn and I see that somebody's looking for a job, I will right click and open a tab. And I may not look at it right then, but by the end of the day, I will look every time I see a person that is not employed, even if it's not related to what I do, I will almost always look at it.
There's also that open to work green circle that can go around your picture.
Yeah, I've seen that a bunch of times too.
Which is a way to do that. And then also open to recruiters, you can check that on your profile.
Yes.
There's a place to put that. And just tell us for a few minutes what you certainly must have the recruiter's version of LinkedIn, right?
I have a very old recruiter version that is now grandfathered and no longer offered.
But it has a lot of filters, right, on your search.
It does. It offers more than the regular, but it's not the elite version at all, because that's horribly expensive. LinkedIn is a great tool for recruiters, and LinkedIn knows that. So they charge a lot of money for good, the better accounts. So like I have 15 emails a month, not a huge number, and I have the additional search capability, and get to see who, and I don't even know what other people that don't have accounts can see anymore. But I can see every time somebody looks at my profile, I can see that they've looked at it and when and such things. So.
Well, I know that keywords can be very important on LinkedIn too for recruiters, because they put a lot of them in the search filters to find the people who are qualified in those areas.
Yeah, if I'm doing a search on LinkedIn, so I don't actually go into that filter screen very often. I just type electrical engineer. I might type like what tool they're looking for. If they're looking for like aerospace, I just type that all in right there.
Yeah, you can do that.
And it works, and it gets me, 100 people. Now I have to look at 100 profiles, but that's my job, right? So
that's why, keywords are really important on LinkedIn for that reason, because people are looking for those words, and when I do a client's profile, I always try to really work hard to make sure that the about section and the headline have stuff in them that's going to attract recruiters, because there are, a lot of you all are different. Some people do have the premium, really expensive version, and they're looking for all this stuff in filters. Other people like you are doing it a little differently. Some people are looking for it in the headline. I mean, everybody's different, and you kind of got to be flexible,
right.
when you're a user.
Right, but I would agree with that the keywords are important. There are so many people out there that have almost nothing on their LinkedIn profile, and except maybe their title. And so I'll look at a profile and be really disappointed, because just saying that you're, and again, using my other example, just saying you're an electrical engineer does not tell me enough, right? I need more information. But granted, if you're not really looking for work, then it's not a big deal. But if you are looking for work, it's important to have that filled out pretty well and to have a lot of good information in there.
Can I ask one last question?
Sure, Marianne.
I have trouble with the how much are you looking for per hour dance.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what I think my value is. I don't know what the hiring manager has capped the position at. But then the recruiters are kind of like the middleman that say, well, let's go with the higher number and see what happens. But then it's just nickel and diming in between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot or if there's a better way to do this conversation.
Well, first, I recommend a site called payscale.com. If you haven't played with that one, one of the things I like about Payscale is that it gives you a lot more data. So it's a little more difficult to use because you have to put in a lot more information about yourself and what you do and how many years of experience and specialties, and you have to put a lot more data, and you even have to put in like the size of the company you're applying to, right? All kinds of stuff. And then it will give you not just a number, but it'll give you a bell curve, right? Saying that like this is the median, and somebody at 15% is earning this, 85% is earning this. So you get an idea of what the range is in the market for the size company you're talking to in your area. So it's a lot more data. The other thing I like to do is so some of this will depend on whether or not you're working through an agency or applying directly to a company. The agency should know, what the appropriate rates are and what the company is likely to pay for your experience. They should have a rough idea of that. Some agencies will try and push the rate higher because they get higher commissions, right? And then it gets knocked down. And I don't like to play that game. I just like to say, look, this is the fair market salary for the person. Though in most cases I will present a range, right? Like, Bob is looking for a salary between 80 and 85K, right? As an example. Because that one, it doesn't lock them into a specific number. It gives a range, an upper and lower bound. So it gives the company some flexibility in that range. And then of course, it's all going to depend on benefits and all the other things. So so it's a starting point. Agencies, if they don't know, I guess I would say I would hesitate if the agency you're talking with is just saying, well, let's try this, as opposed to like, well, I think it's a good tactic to try and put it here. I guess that's my feel for it is the person guessing, or are they using their data to try to negotiate you a better fee? So I guess that's my question there. If you're going direct with a company, I have a different tactic that I recommend making the whole thing into a discussion. So if somebody, the HR person says, so how much money are you looking for? And you can say, well, I will tell you, but I would like to also know what the range is that you are currently, you know, either one, what's your budgeted, what is the range that you have? You know, I want to make this a discussion. I will tell you my information, but I'd like your information in return. And then
Yeah,
you
it's
give
almost
them,
like whoever gives up the information first is kind of at a disadvantage. So you want them to go first.
Yeah.
right.
You know?
Well, you can't, except that I know a couple people that have the exact opposite. That there's a couple articles out there that say that you need to do the reverse, that you need to be the first person to say the number, and you need to be aggressive, right? That if you want to get paid well, if you are good at what you do, you can say, this is how much I earn. And I'll tell you,
Why it's worth it.
I'll give you a personal example that in this contract I'm working on site, I have a range of values that is very, very wide for contract work. And most often I end up getting at the lower end of the range. And I asked for what I wanted and I got it. I was like, you're paying me that amount an hour? Boy, am I going to work hard for you.
Well, you know, it's a matter of research, I think, and knowing your industry, and really, as much as you can, figuring out where you think their pay usually lands. And sometimes you can't do that if you're by yourself and you're not working with a recruiter. But I think ranges are the best way to start the conversation,
right? Because
then you know what your bottom is,
right?
What your absolute bottom is, you know. And then in between that, you can always negotiate. My husband, I'll use my husband as an example. He's an engineer and a project manager. He got an idea from the recruiter what they were willing to pay, and then he gave a band that he knew he wasn't going to go below this number. And he knew that he probably couldn't get the top number, but that's okay. You know, like he just kind of knew what he was comfortable with. And then when it came right down to it, he negotiated for a little extra vacation, you know, and some other perks. Because, you know, if you're only talking a few $1,000s, okay, that's not, I mean, you know what I mean? Yeah. But there really aren't any hard and fast rules about this, but you're right, Eric. I agree. It is a discussion. You know, it should be, because you're a professional and you bring value to the table, and you should be able to talk about why you're worth the money, and also be ready to walk if they're going to be below your salary, you know, that you're asking for, if you can do that. There are people who are desperate for work. So, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels like the conversation is not coming up soon enough. You know, I don't want to waste my time if they're nowhere near where I think they should be for the kind of work that I would do. Well, and I wish it was more upfront.
Yeah. And you can bring that up if you can decide to bring that up. And again, you got to know the right place to bring it up, right? Because you can't bring it up too soon, because you have to at least have sold them partially on what you can do first. Because if you haven't sold them at all and you start throwing out numbers, then you're kind of losing the battle. So you have to win the sales battle first. You have to have them interested in you, and then you can bring up money.
Right? I'd almost ask them, I would just come out and say, after you've gotten to know each other, do you think, I really think that I would really be a good fit for your company. What do you think? You think that I'm a viable candidate? And once you get that established and know you're a real serious candidate, then maybe you can ask a question about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know unless you ask, right, Marianne?
That's right.
You know?
You've got to get an idea of what the rapport is. If you've got a good rapport with the person you're talking with, if you feel like you've got a good connection, if you've had a good conversation, I mean, that's part of what you want to do in the interview. Is you don't want it to be an interrogation. You want it to be a conversation, right? And if you can get the interview into conversation mode, then a lot more good things can happen.
Oh yeah. Well, we're like 1:16, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all for joining us today. We are meeting again in 2 weeks, same time, same place, and our guest will be Deanna Russo. She has a company called Leverage Up, and she helps people grow their LinkedIn connections and following, and she's very good at it. And she's going to share some of her tips.
Awesome.
So please join us again. And everybody have a terrific 2 weeks. Stay safe. Let's work on getting back out there and getting our lives back, right?
Right. This is an hour well spent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you,
An
Eric.
hour plus.
Maybe I'll bring you back, Eric, on a different topic.
Well,
feel free to write me, you guys, and just write me and go, hey, Ruth, how about this topic? Or how about that? Or I know a person who could speak, or come on, bring it.
Okay. There's plenty more.
Yeah.
So Ruth, you and I should have a discussion about resumes.
We're going to. I'd like to do a session on this. It's a very interesting topic.
Yeah. Because
very
I think
debatable.
I think we have some disagreements, which is okay. I'm not saying,
Well, not necessarily, but okay, we'll see.
Well, actually, once you get my book and read it, and you can, redline all the things you think are wrong.
Cool. All right, everybody, Michael, did you want to say something?
No, just thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Very welcome. See you guys soon.
See ya.